Listen here, you piece of trash. You'll sign over your 20 million inheritance to my mother, or we're getting a divorce. That was the sentence that shattered everything. No warning, no discussion, no respect, just an ultimatum thrown like a weapon. What would you do if the person you trusted most suddenly demanded your entire inheritance? Not asked, not negotiated, demanded, and not even for himself, but for his mother. This isn't just a story about money. It's about control, it's about manipulation, and it's about what happens when love turns into leverage. She never imagined her marriage would come to this. When she met him, he was charming, attentive, protective. He spoke about family values, loyalty, building a future together. He admired her independence. He said he loved her strength. But over time, things shifted. It started subtly. Comments about how she handled finances. Questions about her inheritance, the 20 million she received from her late grandfather. He would say things like, that money should benefit the whole family, or, what's the point of having wealth if we don't use it to elevate our parents? At first, she didn't think much of it. It sounded reasonable, generous, even. But generosity stops being generosity the moment it's demanded. The inheritance was legally hers, left to her by someone who believed in her judgment, her future, her autonomy. It wasn't marital property. It wasn't a shared investment fund. It was a gift of trust from one generation to the next. And yet, in her husband's eyes, it became an entitlement. His mother began visiting more often. Conversations about family responsibility became frequent. Subtle guilt trips. Stories about sacrifices she had made for her son. Hints that she deserved security and luxury in her older years. Still, no direct request. Until that day, the argument started over something trivial, a vacation home purchase. He wanted to buy property in his mother's name. She refused, calmly, rationally. That's when the mask slipped. Listen here, you piece of trash. You'll sign over your 20 million inheritance to my mother, or we're getting a divorce. It wasn't just the demand that stunned her. It was the insult, the contempt, the audacity. In that moment, she realized something terrifying. This wasn't about helping his mother. This was about power. Financial control is one of the most dangerous forms of manipulation in a relationship. It doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't scream violence. But it erodes independence. It traps. It isolates. When one partner believes they are entitled to the other's assets, especially assets that are legally separate, it signals a fundamental lack of respect. Marriage is partnership, not ownership. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people don't fall in love with a person. They fall in love with access. Access to status. Access to money. Access to security. The ultimatum revealed everything. If she signed over the inheritance, she would lose not just money, but leverage. Independence. The ability to walk away if things got worse. Because make no mistake, if someone is willing to scream, insult, and threaten divorce over money today, tomorrow it could be something else. Control rarely shrinks. It grows. She didn't respond immediately. Silence can be more powerful than shouting. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone she didn't recognize. The man who once said, "I love that you're strong," was now trying to break that strength. Divorce as a threat is another red flag. Healthy partners don't weaponize separation to force compliance. They communicate. They compromise. They respect boundaries. When someone says, "Do this or I leave," what they're really saying is, "Your value to me is conditional." Conditional on obedience. Conditional on surrender. Conditional on sacrifice. And here's the irony. If he truly believed divorce was the better option than respecting her autonomy, then he had already revealed the fragility of the marriage. She spent that night thinking. Not about the 20 million. About dignity. Money can be rebuilt. Investments can recover. But once you surrender self-respect to appease someone's greed, rebuilding that is much harder. She asked herself the hardest question. If I give in now, what will he demand next? Maybe control over business decisions. Maybe restrictions on friendships. Maybe full financial oversight. Patterns don't appear overnight. They escalate. Financial abuse often begins with shared management. Then, joint decisions. Then, it's better if I handle it. And eventually, you don't need access to that. Experts in relationship dynamics consistently emphasize that autonomy is essential for healthy partnership. When autonomy disappears, resentment grows. And resentment poisons everything. The next morning, she calmly told him she would not transfer the inheritance. No screaming, no insults, just clarity. His reaction confirmed everything. He didn't attempt discussion. He didn't apologize for the insult. He doubled down on the ultimatum. That's when she understood. The inheritance wasn't the problem. The problem was that he believed he could intimidate her into submission. When someone shows you who they are under pressure, believe them. Too many people stay in situations like this because of fear. Fear of public judgment, fear of loneliness, fear of starting over. But fear is a terrible foundation for marriage. Love is built on respect, on mutual protection, on wanting the other person to feel safe, emotionally and financially. What safety is there in being told you're worthless unless you sign away your wealth? Some might argue, it's just money. If you love him, why not help his mother? But love is not proven by financial sacrifice under coercion. Love is proven by support freely given, not extracted through threats. And let's address something important. Inheritances often carry emotional weight. They represent family legacy, memory, continuity. Demanding someone hand that over isn't just a financial request. It's an attempt to rewrite their history. The grandfather who left her that money trusted her judgment, not her husband's mother's. That trust mattered. When she contacted a lawyer, she learned something crucial. Legally, the inheritance was protected as separate property, as long as it wasn't commingled. That means once she transferred it, it would likely become impossible to reclaim. The demand wasn't just immoral. It was strategic, and that realization hurt the most. Because it meant he had thought about it, planned it, discussed it. This wasn't a spontaneous emotional outburst. It was an expectation, and expectations reveal beliefs. He believed her wealth was negotiable. He believed her boundaries were flexible. He believed she would fold. But strength isn't loud. Sometimes strength is simply saying, no. The divorce proceedings began shortly after. Was it painful? Absolutely. Was it expensive? Of course. Was it worth it? Every single day. Because here's the lesson that extends beyond this story. If someone threatens to leave you unless you surrender your independence, they are already gone in spirit. Marriage should expand your world, not shrink it. A partner should celebrate your inheritance as part of your story, not scheme to redirect it. And most importantly, respect should never be conditional. In the aftermath, she rebuilt her life on her own terms. She invested wisely. She supported causes she believed in. She even helped family members, by choice, not coercion. And that difference, choice, changed everything. Money given freely strengthens relationships. Money taken through pressure destroys them. If you're watching this and recognizing similar patterns in your own relationship, pause. Ask yourself, are decisions made together, or dictated? Are disagreements discussed, or threatened? Do you feel secure, or cornered? Financial independence is not selfish. It's protective, especially for women who historically have been pressured to sacrifice assets for family unity. Unity built on inequality is not unity. It's submission. The most powerful moment in this entire story wasn't the ultimatum. It was the refusal, because refusing control is the first step toward reclaiming power. And sometimes, losing a marriage is the price of keeping yourself. So if someone ever tells you, sign it over or I'm gone, remember this. Anyone who values your money more than your dignity has already made their choice. The real question is, will you make yours? When the divorce papers were officially filed, reality hit in waves. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. There was no background music, no slow motion exit, no perfectly delivered final speech. There was paperwork, emails, meetings, silence in a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Part 2 of her story didn't begin with triumph. It began with doubt. Even though she knew she had made the right decision, there were nights she stared at the ceiling questioning everything. Was she too harsh? Should she have negotiated? Was 20 million really worth the collapse of a marriage? But every time those thoughts crept in, she replayed the exact tone of his voice when he called her trash. Not frustrated, not emotional, contemptuous, and that word reminded her, this was never about compromise. Divorce has a strange way of revealing people's true priorities. During mediation, his focus wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't regret. It wasn't even reputation. It was money. He attempted to argue that although the inheritance was legally separate property, it had, emotionally belonged to the family. He insisted that as her husband, he had a right to influence how it was used. He even tried to paint her refusal as selfishness. But legal definitions are not swayed by emotional narratives. The inheritance remained hers. That didn't stop the pressure tactics. Friends began calling her. Mutual acquaintances suggested she was overreacting. Some hinted that she could have simply allocated a portion to keep the peace. His mother reached out with a long message about family unity, about how she had dreamed of generational wealth lifting everyone together. Notice the pattern. Not one apology, not one acknowledgement of the insult, not one moment of accountability, only continued persuasion aimed at her assets. This is how manipulation often works. When direct force fails, social pressure steps in. Guilt becomes the weapon, community opinion becomes the leverage. But here's something powerful she realized during that time. People who genuinely care about you will never pressure you to harm yourself for the comfort of others. And make no mistake, surrendering financial independence under coercion is harm. As weeks passed, she began therapy. Not because she felt broken, but because she wanted clarity. She didn't want to carry resentment into her future. She didn't want this experience to harden her heart. In therapy, she uncovered something uncomfortable. There had been red flags long before the ultimatum. Small criticisms disguised as jokes about her wealth. Subtle remarks about how she was lucky, and therefore should be more generous. Moments when he dismissed her business decisions but exaggerated his own contributions. None of it seemed extreme at the time. That's how erosion works. It doesn't happen in explosions. It happens in teaspoons. One comment here, one expectation there, one normalization of entitlement at a time. By the time he demanded the full inheritance, he likely believed he was simply accelerating an inevitable outcome. He underestimated one thing, her threshold. What he saw as compliance in the past was actually patience. What he saw as softness was reflection. What he saw as generosity was discernment. And discernment has limits. During the legal process, another truth surfaced. He had financial struggles she hadn't fully known about. Risky investments, loans co-signed with his mother. Debts that made the inheritance not just desirable, but necessary for him. That discovery changed the emotional landscape entirely. The ultimatum wasn't just greed. It was desperation disguised as dominance. And desperation can be dangerous. Because when someone feels entitled to your resources as their escape plan, they stop seeing you as a partner. You become a solution, a transaction, an exit strategy. Once she understood that, the guilt dissolved. She wasn't abandoning a loving husband in need. She was refusing to become collateral for someone else's financial recklessness. The divorce finalized months later. Clean, clear, the inheritance untouched. But here's where part 2 truly begins, after the paperwork. Freedom is quiet at first. There's no applause when you choose yourself. No award ceremony for maintaining boundaries. Just a calm that feels unfamiliar. She moved to a new home. Smaller, intentional, designed entirely around her preferences, not compromise. It wasn't about downsizing wealth. It was about right-sizing life. She restructured her investments, met with advisors, created trusts, established clear legal protections so that no future partner could ever attempt similar claims without airtight agreements. Not because she stopped believing in love, but because she started believing in preparation. There's a powerful distinction between cynicism and wisdom. Cynicism says, no one can be trusted. Wisdom says, trust, but structure. She also did something unexpected. She reached out to women's financial empowerment groups and began quietly funding educational programs. Workshops on asset protection, seminars on recognizing financial abuse, legal literacy initiatives. Why? Because she realized how close she came to making a decision that would have altered her entire future. If he had approached her gently, strategically, with incremental transfers, she might have rationalized it. If the insult hadn't exposed his mindset so clearly, she might have doubted herself longer. And that's the chilling part. Many people don't get such a blatant wake-up call. Many are persuaded slowly, kindly, logically, until the money is gone and the power imbalance is permanent. She wanted other women to recognize the signs earlier. Financial abuse doesn't require empty bank accounts. It begins with entitlement to what isn't yours. It begins with monitoring spending, with shaming independence, with framing autonomy as selfishness. And it often hides behind the language of family. Months after the divorce, she ran into him at a social event. It was brief, civil, controlled. He looked different, not physically, energetically, smaller, less certain. He attempted small talk, mentioned how stressful the past year had been, suggested maybe they both overreacted. There it was again, minimization, as if demanding 20 million under threat of divorce was a misunderstanding. She responded calmly, I don't regret protecting myself. No anger, no sarcasm, just truth. And in that moment, she felt something powerful. Closure. Not because he apologized, but because she no longer needed him to. That's an underrated milestone, when someone who once had emotional leverage over you no longer does. Part 2 isn't about revenge. She didn't win by becoming wealthier. She won by becoming untouchable in her self-respect. Her life today looks different than she once imagined. There are quieter mornings, fewer compromises, more intentional relationships. When she eventually began dating again, she was transparent early about financial boundaries. Prenuptial agreements weren't awkward topics. They were non-negotiable standards. And here's the surprising part. The right people weren't threatened by that. Healthy partners respect clarity. They don't interpret protection as accusation. They see it as mutual security. Because mature love understands something immature love does not, security strengthens connection. It doesn't weaken it. Looking back, she sometimes reflects on a difficult question. What if he had never exploded that day? What if he had continued slowly influencing her, persuading her to invest in his mother's ventures, transferring funds piece by piece? Would she have noticed? Would she have drawn a line? That question keeps her vigilant. Not paranoid, aware. There's a difference. Part 2 of this story is not about wealth preservation alone. It's about identity preservation. Money amplifies who people already are. It doesn't create character, it exposes it. His demand exposed entitlement. Her refusal exposed strength. And strength, once exercised, compounds like interest. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel selfish for protecting your assets, hear this clearly. Boundaries are not betrayals. Saying no to coercion is not cruelty. Protecting your inheritance is not greed. Especially when that inheritance represents trust placed in you by someone who believed in your judgment. There is a reason financial independence is often the first target in controlling relationships. Because independence equals options, and options equal power. When someone removes your options, they gain leverage. She chose to keep her options. That decision cost her a marriage. But it saved her future. And here's the final truth of part 2. The most valuable asset she protected wasn't the 20 million. It was her ability to walk away from anyone who saw her as a resource instead of a partner. Money can be calculated, dignity cannot, and once you understand that, ultimatums lose their power. Because when someone says, do this or I'm leaving, you're no longer afraid of them walking away. You're prepared to hold the door open. That is what part 2 is really about. Not survival, not revenge, but evolution, from love with conditions, to self-respect without negotiation.